Hello, welcome to The Laughter Effect, the podcast in which we investigate and celebrate our relationship with comedy and laughter. This week, I'm delighted to welcome let me get this right. So, TV presenter, horticulturalist, Diarmuid Gavin. Welcome. Welcome, sir. How are you?
I'm good, James. Great to be here.
Yes, and you're back in Ireland. You were over in the UK yesterday, back in Ireland?
Yeah, that's my kind of constant, and it has been for the last 30 years, every couple of days, on a boat or on a plane. And if I'm lucky enough, unlike your long journeys, that it's only the UK,
Yeah.
makes me very happy.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Well, let's get straight on with it. So the first question is a double header, but an easy one. So, how are you and where are you?
I am very good. I'm quite relaxed because I've just realized I messed up my diary and I thought I had a weekend's work ahead of me and I'm off. So, so that's very good. And I'm in County Wicklow. I'm in a place called Kilmechanic in County Wicklow, which is just south of Dublin. It's right beside the mountains, right beside the sea, and the motorway to the airport is 40 minutes. So it's a
What's not to like?
nice place
Not
to
to
be.
like.
Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you what. Let's start at the very beginning. So we're going to do famous, non-famous. Who was the first non-famous person? Let's go to the genesis of your relationship with laughter. Where did your sense of humor come from? Who made you laugh first?
I would imagine that it was in the family or in the pub, because even as a kid, you were brought to the pub. If you went out on a Saturday or bank holiday Monday or something like that, that's where the relatives tended to gather. And you might be playing football in the car park, or you might be in listening to the jovial conversation. Christmas would have been a big thing, and all the uncles messing around playing poker, I think, in the kitchen, and all the aunts having a natter, and the shrieks of laughter when everybody's guard was down was a big thing too.
So yeah, you get those sort of apocryphal stories. I remember being as a kid, your parents would bring you out a bottle of a Coke or something like that with a straw and a biscuit, and they would sort of like get into an advanced state of refreshment while you sort of made your own fun. And I know it's a bit of a cliche, or you couldn't have that today, but could you imagine? I suppose it still happens some places, but in my own sort of sphere, it's unheard of.
It's unheard of, but you learned a lot. You picked up an awful lot by being allowed to be around adult company in that. And, life for everybody is tough enough. So to see people in a happy state, and generally that was the state of, pubs or Christmases in Ireland. People were just relaxed, happy, enjoying their few minutes of freedom or whatever, away from the rat race. So I think comedy, and I think humor is always there with in an Irish setting anyway. It just if you can't engage in humor and in banter, you're probably in trouble.
Yeah, you certainly don't fit in. That's for sure. Definitely not. So let's talk about your history with comedy on TV and radio. We talked about this yesterday when we had a chat. So when you going back to when you were a kid, what were the first things that made you chuckle on TV?
I suppose it was sitcoms. It was things like Are You Been Served, which I loved, The Good Life, all those suburban butterflies, all those suburban sitcoms that were coming to us from across the water would have had a kind of huge influence. I think, and it was the main outlet for comedy because that was 70s into the 80s, which were a kind of grey, pebble dashed time otherwise. So to see something utterly frivolous. It might have been, the whole family in watching the telly and Dad's Army, being on. You're learning a little bit. You're seeing those arrows come up from France. You're learning a little bit of history. It's another culture. It's not your culture, but it's been beamed into your living room, and you get Captain Mannering and all that. So you're painting pictures yourself. So those would have been gathering around the telly with the family, or looking at my dad quizzically as he chuckled away with Benny Hill, which I never got.
You never got. No, that was the thing. Whereas Benny Hill these days is thought of as being very sort of infantile, etc. But I was the same. I hated slapstick when I was a kid, which you would think because it's more visual would have been, would have been more popular among younger people. But Laurel and Hardy, I love them now. But as a kid, I had no interest. They used to get on my nerves.
Well, the other thing, of course, was the American influence, because there was all the cartoons, and I think Disney probably had an hour, so you had all the Flintstones and the Tom and Jerry. So really simple, really well, totally slapstick in a way. Our viewing habits from 5 years ago, at my age, have completely changed, and I would think of myself, if I was looking to the future, I absorb comedy now in the same as everybody else, 15, 30 minute bits on social media, something like that. Jimmy Carr doing stand up or something like that. I would have regarded that as weird. But I was reading something about Saturday Night Live, and they were saying it's not just as it goes out, it's how it's seen on YouTube in the week after that they count up for the viewing figures.
Yeah, exactly. Everything is evolved, doesn't it? Everything is evolved. And yeah, I used to like you. Like, tell you what, one thing I just want to go back to. You said about we were talking about the good life and all those sort of things, Terry and June or whatever. You called it suburban escapism, which seems
Yes.
almost like a misnomer. Why do you want to escape into suburbia? If you know what I mean, it's strange, but you're absolutely right. It's what it was. It doesn't sound right, but it's what you used to escape into suburbia, which is probably from where you were watching the show for many.
Absolutely. I was watching in kind of cookie cutter versions of those houses, but I suppose I would have been fascinated by situations, by the comedic situations, by how people lived in other places, that they were so similar to the way that you live, but look at what they were allowed to say. Or in the case of The Good Life, which was amazing to me, look what they were allowed to do. And it might have been very tame, but here you have people representing what was saying out loud, what was going on in life. So, times of austerity, you have the guy next door who drives the big car and is a member of the golf club, and she's a member of the tennis club. And then you have Tom and Barbara digging up the front lawn and growing spuds on it and keeping pigs and whatever. So that was quietly anarchic for me. And there's another element to this, James. When I was growing up, we had what were kind of comedically termed as the Troubles up in the north, and that was present everywhere in your life. So it was 100 miles from us, and we didn't see it day to day, didn't have any evidence of it the way we lived, but it led the news. So kind of dropping into somebody else's life that was some others to have them or something like that, or the liver birds, was such escapism from what was truly dreadful.
Yeah, but he was still real enough for you to be able to relate to it. It was still close enough.
As were Yes, as were the Beverly Hillbillies, or whatever, that dream of uh, country folk moving to Beverly Hills, or Green Acres, or I Love Lucy, or any of that, because it was room sets, wasn't it? We all lived in rooms, and it was in and out. It was kind of slapstick, but in all these cases, really good writing.
Yeah, a lot of people go on about British humour being very popular in the 70s and the 60s, and etc. etc. But obviously, a lot of people mistake Irish humour. Like, people say, "Oh, yeah, I'll put something up by Dave Allen." People say, "Oh, British humour." No, it was very, very Irish. It's Irish humour. Just tell us about what was happening in the comedy scene in Ireland in the 70s and 80s, because in the 60s, because there will have been people that we've never heard of, unfortunately, that were absolutely huge over there, household names that were hilarious.
Yeah, absolute household name. So the big one that comes to mind is a guy called Brendan Grace, who's a stand-up comedian who traded on kind of this is to diminish him when I said, but mother-in-law jokes, the father of the bride's speech at the wedding. And he used to produce a record on vinyl every year, and I think every family had that. It was a comedy, jeez, and he's only a couple of years past. He was absolutely brilliant, and he is some person who would reduce everybody in a room, whether you were watching him. I think the main outlet for comedy was, probably still is, was that long-running chat show, The Late Late Show, presented then by Gay Byrne. So he supported so many different industries, and the comedy industry was one. So whether you were Brendan Grace, Hal Roach, or a litany of other stand-ups. But Brendan Grace was really interesting. He was just an iconic figure here. Like a lot of these comedians, they'd go on tours of the UK, but it was when acts came over here and saw them and experienced them. The main place, if you wanted to experience them live, was something that doesn't exist, I think, anymore: cabaret rooms. So really smoky joints where you'd have your glass of blue on, maybe a meal, and these would be the act for the night. But Frank Sinatra came to play in Dublin, I think, with probably Liza Minnelli and Sammy Davis Jr. And they were playing in a place called the RDS, Royal Dublin Society, in a big auditorium. But it was in a few nights. And one evening they took over. Frank wanted to throw a party, so they took over a pub across the road so that Frank could throw this party. The Horseshoe House, it was called. And Brendan Grace was hired to be the term. And he had the mole in tears, so much so that Sinatra then brought him on every tour, everywhere. Put him in touch with his agent, who became Brendan's agent, and he toured worldwide with him. And every night Frank was reduced to tears, and that's where you get that tradition of Mrs. Brown's Boys. It comes from directly, through that idea of family comedy and looking inside at simple situations to mine for laughs.
So although we don't know of him, he's not very well known over here. His influence obviously is stretched far and wide, and he's actually, with Mrs. Brown's Boys, which is still going, still hugely popular. So he's responsible for a lot then. And obviously, is he still with us?
No, he's not. He passed about 5 years ago. Absolutely much loved. He had another character called Butler, who was a school boy, and it was all the antics which Butler used to get up to. And I see that in some of the characters from Mrs. Brown's Boys, which again is a show that is often dismissed, but it comes from that tradition, and I think there's comedy gold there.
Absolutely, absolutely. Another very famous and much loved Irishman who was born on this day today in 1918 is Spike Milligan.
Oh, yes.
Spike, are you a fan of Spike?
Yeah, I was a fan of Spike. I was intrigued by Spike, and indeed I met him when I was a kid because he used to do a lot of north-south stuff, and he had, not far from where I'm living, there was a peace centre in further down in Wicklow, and he used to lead walks and do appearances there. I was a fan. Was I a fan? I was a fan through other people being a fan. I knew he was a very good writer in the Flann O'Brien tradition. I loved whenever I saw him on, again, The Late Late. And that would have been a place that I saw Peter Ustinov appearing, really as a very regular raconteur. But in terms of his television work, I wouldn't have known it that well.
No. There was a very, surreal series called Q, which ran for many, many years. And people used to say, "Oh, you should post more Q. It's absolutely fantastic. It was wonderful." But I remember watching some of the later series. It's one of those ones that you sort of have this memory of it being absolutely fantastic when you were a kid, and then when you watch it back, you think, "Oh, it's very hit and miss. Some of it's okay," but there is this sort of rose-tinted thing where you look backwards. But I think it's also because your sense of humor evolves. It's not just rose-tinted. It evolves.
Yes, and also remember when we were watching back then, there was nothing else to watch. We were all watching the same thing. And so you'd pick from it whatever I suppose that you like. You definitely knew if you liked Jim Davidson or not, though. So you had your faves and your others that you were a bit iffy about.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Is that have you ever met anyone famous, like, I suppose, well known, who you didn't expect to be funny at all, but turned out to be hilarious? Has anyone surprised you like that?
Yeah, there was one. I've met lots of people, and every kind of comedian complains about this. I've met lots of people that I wanted to be funny, and it was just awkward. And that's the main type of meeting I'd have with comedians. There's an Irish kind of runner, world champion, Olympian, Sonia O'Sullivan,
Yeah. Oh, of course,
and
yeah.
as a nation, we watched her because we needed somebody to get behind and, as they say in those battle days. And Sonia was amazing, but she was very controlled in terms of the media interviews she would give. She was concentrating on the run, on the game, on the training. She didn't, it didn't appear to suffer full kind of gladly. And I saw on a coach sheet once that I was going to be spending a week or two with her on a particular project. And I kind of worried about that a little bit. Everybody else seemed okay, but Sonia seemed a little straight. Oh, she's not going to like me at all. She was the biggest messer in a Jedward type way. Very, very funny, and we got on like a house on fire and have been friends since.
Brilliant.
Mischievous in terms of funny. So I think humor comes in all sorts of different ways, and the antics you can get up to. And I remember we were doing a race around, it was Ireland, England, Scotland, and Wales. It was for sports relief. So we were racing around both countries, sailing and cycling and running and rowing and doing all these things over the course of about a week. And the hijinks in the hotels when we got in the nightclubs and whatever, mad fun.
Oh, brilliant. But
Sonia, great.
so I just want to go back to what has influenced you comedically, because we've talked about TV, but radio. We talked about this a little bit. I'm my favorite medium for entertainment is radio. I always go, if I had to just choose one to go on a desert island with, as long as I've got my radio, I'm okay. And comedy's played a huge part that with me. Sort of things like Round the Horn, and still today, Ed Reardon's Week. There is so much. It's the gift that keeps on giving, because there's so much still being made and there's so much to go back to. What's your relationship like with radio? Have you been a fan of radio comedy over the years?
I love radio, first of all, love radio comedy. I'd be, I'm fairly general in terms of my comedic taste, I suppose, but Alan Partridge, once I came across him, first of all, was it I'm Alan Partridge on the radio first? Because I remember getting all the cassettes and playing them in the car, and they would have me in fits
Yeah.
with this curry. So that was very big for me. In Ireland, always been great comedy on radio. There's a good show now on every week. A lot of it's to do with impersonation, but there was a show called Scrap Saturday, and broadcast at midday on the main RTE station for years. And the guy who wrote it, or the main writer, was the guy who ended up being Father Ted, Dermot. What was his second name? Dermot Morgan. Dermot Morgan.
Go Morgan.
And that was brilliant because he was satirically taking the piss out of what was happening in the news that week, and it was just so ridiculous. But you could hear all his frustration with the strangleholds, certain strangleholds of Irish life been taken out. He couldn't get a television commission. It all came out on radio, and every politician was scared of him. And I even had relatives who were impersonators on that show. So I have a sister-in-law who thinks he was worse and would never ever listen to him and whatever. I thought he was a genius.
Is that stuff available to listen to? There must be some of it on YouTube.
Oh, it must be. It was so iconic that the Sunday papers would have reviews of the previous day's shows on the front pages. So yeah, it'll still be around. Definitely.
Well, let's touch on Father Ted, because it's probably one of the most famous Irish sitcoms, ever to come out at the Emerald Isle. But I haven't met many people who dislike it. I've met a lot of people who are very wary of it, but they'll always find something to like. What are your views on Father Ted?
I love it. Absolutely. I remember saying it was a big deal when it got commissioned because of Diarmuid's career. Really well known as a character called Father Trendy, and for Chachos. So there was another excellent broadcaster in Ireland called Mike Murphy running around the same time as Gay Byrne.
Yeah.
And he would have a Saturday evening entertainment show called The Live Mike. And you'd have a big audience, and then all of a sudden from the audience, you'd hear a shout. And it would be a priest in the audience shouting, a priest often carrying a Harley and a sliver. And I'm going on rants about God knows what. So it turned out that Dermot Morgan started writing into Mike Murphy's radio show about issues, then became a guest, then he turned up on the television show, eventually got his own shows, and then went across to Channel 4. I think what they did between him and who was it, Graham, and I can't remember the other as
Arthur Matthews.
Arthur and Declan Lowney, who I think directed, who was a friend of a friend.
Yeah.
I think absolutely genius because they punctured things about the state that needed to be punctured. They learned so much from all the British sitcoms they had grown up kind of watching, and they brought it home in a way to this little Burren Island off the west coast of Ireland, and the cast they assembled from Ardle to Dermot to Pauline Madeleine to Father Jack, absolutely brilliant. I thought it was great, and it's a bit like it's very strange. What's the comedy set in the hotel in Devon?
Fawlty Towers.
So they only made a certain amount.
Yeah.
Of Fawlty Towers, maybe 12 or 16.
Well, they made 12, yeah.
So I've still come across Fawlty Towers that I've never seen. And it's the same with Father Ted. There's a couple that have escaped. There was only 3 series.
Yeah.
And late night Channel 4 to both series, I'll chuckle away at.
Yeah.
Because you recognize, if you're having an argument with the wife and you think of that husband and wife shopkeeper who are screaming blue murder at each other, as we all do,
Yeah.
or just in virtually every situation. Love it.
I think it had everything. It's certainly one of the most quotable sitcoms that's ever been created. They said, "Are you still a racist there, father?" And it was every single episode there'd be something. But even the written one, when they're standing outside the cinema and trying to get people to slow down, we say, "Be careful there now." It's these sort of and he didn't have to be Irish because you read it and you can picture somebody saying it. It's the gift that keeps on giving. But to have so many very, very strong characters in one sitcom, because usually they're based around 1 or 2. The Good Life was slightly different. They had 4, but that was only supposed to be 2. It was Richard Bryars who sort of recommended that they bring Jerry and Margot into it more. They weren't originally going to be. They were going to be bit part players, sort of, almost. But Father Ted.
Yes, and some of those where Dermot was known. No, yeah, he's probably the only one who was well known. Now, every Irish comedian and actor got to play a part in that series because it was such a brilliant, such brilliant writing, and some of these episodes had casts of priests or bishops or whatever. So many faces are now recognizable to it. There's another show though that I think Father Ted was gentle with. Remember, we were really ruled by politicians, some of whom were a bit dubious. We were ruled by a really oppressive Catholic Church, many of whom were dubious and up to all sorts of no good. There was another program on which really punctured them though, and that was called The Savage Eye. And it was fronted by a comedian called David Mac Savage, who came from a very well connected family. His cousin is Ryan Tuberty, who was a big presenter of the Late Night here. He had an uncle who was a cabinet minister, but he took no prisoners. He really turned his savage eye to the affairs of the state, whether it was clerical abuse or whether it was radio shows that seemed to enjoy the misery of people. So call-in shows that really traded on hard stories from people and mined them from for misery. So that's a show that I would really credit with bringing kind of truth to power in a way that people didn't like but couldn't look away from because it was telling people what was happening.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And again, that's something, because what I want to get from this podcast is stuff that, like, you've however many people you've named and shows that after we've finished speaking, I'm going to go and look up. So again, there's another one. But the show you just mentioned there, that must have been incredibly brave. We've never really had that over here, with the church having such a clutch on society, so much influence, so much power, and it's something that I can't really relate to. So, to actually go ahead with a show like that in Ireland, then pre Father Ted, must have been incredibly brave. They must have got a huge amount of kickback from that, for doing that.
Yeah, I think he's probably an abrasive character. So
You can take it.
Dave McSavage, it may have imploded anyway, or there might have been reasons not to commission again. But again, this might have started with Dave Allen because, early on, and Dave was from the next neighborhood to mine, but was very suave and debonair. And to see him on the BBC with a lot of clerical, now, never minding it as deep, or maybe never understanding what was actually going on at that stage, because so much was hidden. But all of these things played their part in diminishing the power that the church had over people, because you couldn't ignore it. You have one guy, I remember, you have a maybe it was a cardinal or a bishop or something like that, in his black cape, black cassock, black cape, black hat, and he'd go to football games and he would grab children from the sidelines, children who were watching football games, and run off with them. But that was happening, or that had happened, and all sorts of, as we know, a bit. So to see it portrayed in such a way, really, because people didn't want to believe when the power of the church began to fall. So comedy played a huge part, I think, in pointing out what actually had happened and the fact that we had to examine our past in a real way.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating. As you said, it played. The more you think about it, especially from our point of view, Father Ted, because everybody used to think, "Oh my God, they must be gosh, it's blasphemous, etc." But no, it was having an effect. It was chipping away at that power by the power of ridicule, if you like. But
Yes.
yeah, was something that needed, very much needed to happen. But just talking about Dave Allen, Dave Allen's my all-time favorite Irish comedian. When I first started going onto Instagram, I was like, well, people aren't, people need to be, see more of Dave Allen. Absolutely. But it was interesting that he never appeared. His shows never appeared on RTE. I don't think they appeared on Irish television. So they were sort of, Ireland was hidden from his material almost.
Well, not really, because we lived for a lot of it, certainly on the East Coast, where maybe the majority of the population, we lived in multi-channel land. So we have always been able to access BBC and ITV, and now everybody can see everything. So he mightn't have appeared on Irish television. It's a funny thing. Again, a lot of these things are talking about Ireland in the past because everything has changed. Well, so many things have changed and changed utterly. And those powers that people are held to account now, and the church's power is just doesn't exist. Certainly in the way that it had. But what people didn't like if they were in positions of commissioning programs is maybe if somebody went and did well elsewhere. So that might have been a way, a reason. I've no idea. I know Gay Byrne had this a little bit when he went off to Granada in Manchester. I know that Terry Wogan certainly had it, so it wasn't appreciated if you came back. Who do you think you are, being the big boy? And I think Dave Allen didn't need to come back.
No, did you ever meet Dave? Were you ever lucky enough to meet him?
No, just I think I was just before, so I got to meet loads of people from the box, from Bruce Forsyth to Tom O'Connor to, extraordinary situations that you'd end up with, but never Dave Allen.
No,
No.
no. I was going to ask if you have a favourite Dave Allen sketch. I've got about 107, I think, all told. But I feel the one that caused the most uproar was the Pope stripping. That really, that brought that brought everything to a standstill. But conversely, I think it was the final episode of the first series, and it's what got him commissioned for a second series. So there you
But
go.
yeah, and it's funny, would never have happened in this country. Yeah, they when you talk about that, my mind goes immediately to another episode of the Late Late Show, and it is comedy, but it's black comedy because there was some quiz or some question of somebody in the audience. So this is probably 70s. Is asked about what she was wearing on her wedding night in bed or something, or he was, and turns out he was wearing nothing. And then a bishop the following Sunday denounced the program uh, to the country. And yeah. And it was the fact that I can recount this, 40, 50 years later. So all of these things had an effect. But when the blinkers fell off, remarkable, absolutely remarkable, because there is no looking back. There's certainly no going back. There's certainly no threat of that hanging over. So I think it's all of that, because they were sacred cows who we found out we couldn't trust, couldn't believe in, makes us question everything, and changed Ireland, through that sort of comedy, because comedians would have had a field day with that, from being a conservative population in general to being quite a liberal and welcoming one.
Yeah, and people are still free to go to church and believe in God, aren't they? So everyone's a winner. Yeah.
Yes, and there's a resurgence in that, because especially young people feel they're, with the mess of the world, they feel they're looking for something, and if they find that in therapy or in faith, fair play to them, but at least it's not controlling everybody else.
Exactly, and they're making a choice to do it as opposed to it being indoctrinated. Let's move on to the industry you've worked in for how many years now?
Oh, so gardening probably about 40, and television probably about 30.
Right. Well, let's stick to gardening. Let's start with gardening. Is there a kind of a sense of humour within gardening? Is there certain things? Because I did a book with a guy called Jim Buttress, who I think Jim. He was the head judge, wasn't he, at the RHS? But he had the bowler hat.
Joey man. Yeah, very nice man.
And I forget the conversation because it happened so long ago, but he did say that there was a certain kind of sense of humour within the horticultural industry. You laugh at certain things or even at certain people. I know that he told me, I mentioned Alan Titchmarsh one day, and he said, "Oh, March Tit," and I obviously had no idea this. But is there what do people laugh at? Do you have your own sense of humour, your own humour within horticulture?
I do, but it's a different sort of humor, because I'm a garden designer, and I believe as a garden designer that you should be able to express everything through gardens. Gardens can be pretty, but that's not their only role. They can melt a house into its environment. They can be a great place to escape to. They can be great for the environment. and they can just be a lovely hobby within to relax. But I think gardens have the opportunity to say things and express things, and that might be politics or that might be humor. And what I think is there is the hyacinth bucket way of gardening, which is almost a moral way and certainly a way of a social order, and that is completely lacking in humor. So I would naturally rebel against that. And I think this probably came to the fore maybe 5 years ago, whenever there was a coronation. So there was a new king in your country, new king and queen, and I was commissioned by a very unionist, loyalist castle in the north of Ireland, Antrim and Newton Abbey, to create a coronation garden because I was doing lots of work with them at the time, and I wanted to. We wanted to invite people to this garden. It had to be royalist in a way, and being royalist is going to ostracize a fair amount of the population, but we were building something big and using council money for it, so it had to be. And flags and emblems were, a particular problem, and music was a particular problem. So everything was a problem. Um, and I found the answer was through comedy in a strange way. So I was building a kind of a massive pavilion, a three-story pavilion with a massive crown on top. And we were to use all the emblems, the royal emblems, so crowns and orbs. So the orb became a County Minogue 2 meter diameter liver ball. But the thing about the garden was not absolutely pretty, but every 15 minutes it put on a performance. So it looked very gorgeous. You'd stand looking at it, it looked kind of normal and slightly pompous. And then music would come on, and you'd see plants beginning to bob up and down, and you'd see topiaries go around, and then you'd see bubbles being blown and whatever. So puncturing true comedy, puncturing the uh, political aspects of it, but choosing music for that was really important. And I was thinking, right, every 15 minutes, what tune would play? And I went around weeks for this because we were embedding everything was been matched up electronically and whatever. So it was gardening, but electronic and mechanical engineering beneath the ground and all the way up this pavilion. I couldn't think what song, and I was going to classical music and whatever. It was all fun, but not really saying anything. Then I was listening to Desert Island Discs one day, and somebody chose "Bring Me Sunshine" by Morecambe and Wise. Um, uh, and I just remembered every Christmas Morecambe and Wise show, and I remembered that dance as they did. So we created this garden for the royal couple that danced to "Bring Me Sunshine" and just made everybody laugh who came. And then just a couple of weeks after the coronation, the king and queen came over, and they had no idea what to expect. But I saw her kind of, I saw him nudge her and say, look at that," and then he told me that he knew Morecambe and Wise and how they would have loved this and how surreal it was. So there's a Spike Milligan absurdity to bringing humor into that and using glitter balls instead of and blowing bubbles at the royal couple, uh, and then with that music, so you find your humor and something that can make people chuckle in different ways.
Yeah.
That's the sort of comedy in gardens that I like.
Yeah, yeah.
And yeah, it's a different way of doing things, but I think, yeah, I like the challenge of that.
Well, Spike Milligan and Morecambe and Wise, it's not a bad mix. You can't really go wrong if you're sort of like even subliminally influenced by those three. What about gardeners themselves? What about gardening people, the community? Is there a shared sense of humour among you as people?
I think among my own gardening friends, again in the pub, yeah,
Or generally?
absolutely.
Yeah.
In and especially in Ireland, because if you don't slag, you don't survive. So taking the piss out of somebody in a loving, light-hearted way is hugely important. Not so much across the water, not so, and especially in media gardening, it is, a little bit more serious and a little bit, nobody likes who's on top. So you want to, uh, the, it's more people having a dig in gardening terms than celebrating somebody's joy. And that Irish humour doesn't transfer, I think, easily to the British media gardening fraternity.
Um, has laughter? I sent you this question this morning because I only kind of only thought of it a little while ago. But has laughter or having a sense of humour ever helped you through a difficult time?
I'm sure it has, but I couldn't pinpoint it to particular situations. It does make me relax um enormously. I mean, trigger happy TV when things weren't going well, when I couldn't get it. There was always, park your dreams and ambitions and watch this on a Friday evening or something like that was, or Paul and Pauline Calf. I remember those sort of programs being a great help when nothing was happening because that unified everybody. And I remember it being a great place to say to somebody, come have a look at this because you're going to absolutely love that. So that shared sense. So I think, yeah, maybe in general, getting through tougher times
Yeah.
like that, they're interesting.
I think COVID with COVID when because everybody had a tough time during COVID, but I rediscovered the thick of it because I love a bit of satire. Both my sons have been doing politics, so we've been watching Yes Ministry, Yes Prime Minister together, which has been an absolute joy. I'm pausing it every 5 minutes and explaining something to them because obviously a lot of it's lost on them. But it's been fantastic. But I remember I kind of learnt to swear again properly, proficiently by watching Malcolm Tucker, etc., etc. And it was that's my memory from COVID is the thick of it, watching the thick of it almost on a loop. And so it turned a difficult time into, as I said, that's my prevailing memory from COVID is Malcolm Tucker
But
swearing.
yeah, I have a kind of different take on that because I was involved with New Labour and I was in the thick of it. Uh, so to the point that I was at every dinner and I could bring my mom to Downing Street to meet Tony Blair because she adored him, uh, uh, and Alistair Campbell and all that at that stage. So seeing it from the thick of it was very, really very interesting. And then I remember I did a partly political broadcast, myself and Vera Duckworth, uh,
Liz Dawn.
for
Yeah.
Liz Dawn. Yes, I remember hugging an oak tree in some park, talking about growth because Britain had more growth than Germany and France and Italy or something like that put together. So that was all very surreal and being in the thick of that. And yes, how I was cultivated to become part of that, but also cynical because I remember going to the Labour Party, their big dinner, and they never let you know until the day. It was always on the Dorchester in Park Lane or something like that.
Yeah.
But in the midst of the Iraq War, going to this, and it had not been mentioned once in this big kind of celebration of Labour and all the great and the good and whatever, and the essence of the issue and whether Britain should have been part of that war or not, and whether there were Iraq had all these, much the same as what's happening now, except not much the same because Starmer didn't fall further. I wasn't
No,
bullied into it.
exactly.
Sorry, I got away from comedy then,
Right,
and I
no,
went back
it's the
into.
first diversion. We're allowed a diversion or two. That's not a bad thing. Do you have a favourite joke? Not everybody
No,
does.
no, I don't. I'm not great comedically. I looked up loads of jokes with the intention of passing one off, but I couldn't tell you a joke to save my life.
No, no.
So I don't. I always read the best jokes from the Edinburgh Fringe, and I try and understand them. Uh, uh, But no, I don't have a favorite, and I've never been that good. I know lots of yeah, some of my best friends are comedians. They are stand-ups in the Irish scene. I have no, I don't have any joke, but the trigger happy. I have a funny incident rather than a joke. On so I love trigger happy. I told you that, and I remember going into. Do you remember Ned Sheeran's program, Radio Four
Yeah, yeah,
on
loose
at
ends.
loose ends? So I was going into loose ends, and very excited by this. And I was being interviewed by Emma Freud, and I just love this situation. And I was waiting in broadcasting house in the lobby, and we were waiting to be collected. And then a fellow guest arrived, and it was Dom Jolly. But the second he arrived, it was the 11th of the 11th at 11 a.m. So Dom Jolly was standing there as if he was a character from Trigger Happy, just standing there absolutely still in the center of radio reception. And I thought it just felt like a moment from Trigger Happy. That was rather strange. Then it turned out his dad lived in the same block of flats that I lived in London, and I went on to do plenty with Dom. But as for favorite jokes, no.
No, so I heard a rumor. It may even have come from yourself that you're in the middle of, or you're about to finish writing your first novel, but somebody from the world of comedy might have been doing something similar. Just explain if you would.
Well, yes. So I'm writing a. It's not a comedic. It's actually very dark, and it's called Murder Most Foul, and it's a murder mystery set at the Chelsea Flower Show. Two rival gardeners gardening next to each other, and then something happens. And but James, I've been writing this for 11 years. And in the past year, I really got serious about it. So working my way through it, and I was in London and talking to somebody about. They love the idea because cozy crime is everywhere now, and they love the idea of bypassing and making it into a drama before anyone. So I'm over, and then uh, that was on the Thursday, and on the Friday, I'm back in Dublin, and I'm at a party just before Christmas, and there's a hero of mine at this party, but it's always very awkward with him because I don't know if he's shy or he doesn't like gardening or what it is. Not many people there. There's 30 or 40 of us, but I see him in the distance. So it's Ard O'Hanlon from Father Ted,
Father Dougal. Yeah.
Father Dougal, who is genius. Um, so I think to myself, right, if he comes over, I have to have a line. I have to have something to say because everybody's getting to meet everybody. I have to have something to say. So I thought of a brilliant line, and the brilliant line was, Argo, there's two people in this room who have presented Top of the Pops. Who's the other one? So because both of us had, and that made him sure, and we experienced. And then he says to me, "Oh," he says, I should have gotten in touch with you before this." I said, "Why is that?" He says, "Well, I've written a book, and he says it's the first in a series of three, and it's about an Irish gardener who goes over to England and does gardens at the Chelsea Flower Show, and then gets lots of television programs and just whatever. And uh, he comes back to Ireland and he solves murder mysteries." And I said, "That's hilarious, but it isn't because I've written my book." But what I didn't tell you, I think, was so that was the week before Christmas. And on Christmas morning, uh, even though the book isn't published yet, one of our presents was a copy of this book because my sister in law is livery editor for one of the newspapers here. So she gives me a copy of the book, and I can't believe it. And then somebody else who's with us for Christmas Day, no, I knew he knew Arvel, so I said you wouldn't have his mobile. So I send Arvel a picture of me, very grumpy looking picture of me, reading his blunder mystery. Uh, so I just sent him that. And at midnight, I got a response to say, "Feck, I haven't even got a copy of the book yet. And I said, well, as a murderer, I think it's very important as a crime writer. It's very important that know my sources and know that. And he wrote back to me, as a priest, you're forgiven.
That's brilliant. That's brilliant. I think that's where we'll leave it. We're up to about 50 minutes, so that's perfect. Diamond, that's been absolutely fantastic. So thank you very, very much indeed. Obviously, this is the start of the podcast. We've only recorded a couple, so we're finding our feet. But this has been a huge amount of fun, and you've been brilliant. So thank you very, very
Thank you,
much.
James.